Hello, and welcome back to Bitwig featuring the grid. Today, let's build a distortion. Now that means we need some source material, which is why we have this little meditation from our friends at Overclock loaded up. Fun reminder, clips that are loaded from the library in Bitwig actually contain the devices, the notes, everything else. So there's a lot that can be manipulated. So if we're going to build a distortion, that means we need FX grid today instead of polygrid. And loaded by default, there's really no sound change because the default patch in FX grid is nothing. Audio is coming in, audio is going out, straight through with the patch cord. This entire patch is the equivalent of a patch cord. It is just taking what it receives and then sending it out. So if we're going to build an effect, have a little starter here, which again is not really doing anything to manipulate the sound. I just have a couple monitors here so that we can see the signal before on the way in and the signal as it is modified. So distortion tends to consist of three parts. One, applying gain to the signal. Two, then chopping or clipping or cutting the signal in some way so it doesn't get any louder. And then three, putting it through a filter to smooth out the flat spots that have been created. So let's start with gain and crank this up, and something interesting occurs. You can already see the flatlining, but you can also hear it. Now, why is that? Something we should notice about the audio out module, so this applies to everything in the grid, is that it does have a clipping mode on it to begin with. So when it's set too hard, it's going to pretty much get rid of those signals that are going too high altogether. If it's soft, it tries to do it in a warmer way. So you don't see the difference here because it's happening inside of the audio out module, but you hear that it's a bit of a warmer distortion to begin with. Now, clipping is on by default because modules or plugins that receive signal out of grid might not be very happy if it's an insanely out of range signal. So there you have it. Just realize that that is always there. Now, this isn't how we want to create distortion because we want to be in charge of what's going on. So we talked about gain. We talked about clipping after that. So if we were to look at the level category, we do have a module called clip, which will let us define the amplitude at which we should start flatlining. And again, we'll start seeing two different signals over there now. So the red signal is the output signal. And with most forms of distortion, maybe apply gain so it lands in a different part of the frequency or a different part of the curve. With distortion, you typically get additional frequencies coming through as they are here. So, pretty flat signal. That's interesting. Now, what we would typically do for the third part is to put a filter at the end. So if I enable this, now it's actually rounding the signal on the way out. You can hear sonically how that changes things. But for now, we want to hear the full effect, so I'm going to bypass the filter for the time being. Now, the approach here, we're going to start collecting. Let's go ahead and grab these modules. That was kind of a fun combination. And then reset them, and we can insert something different. So we could look at the shaper category as a way to start, where there's different techniques for shaping the areas of amplitude in the sound differently. So starting with distortion seems logical. And like the soft clipping example we heard on the audio out, distortion is trying to create a curve, which most of the time curves are giving us a warmer sound, something a bit more natural in the transitions. And again, this pre-gain that we've got can be applied to put us in a different region of the curve altogether. That sounds kind of fun. I'm going to collect that And now that we're thinking about curves on here, let me go back to the level category for a moment and bring in bend. Now, what's interesting about bend is it is letting you define that curve on your own, whether it's going in the distortion direction or the opposite direction. So now, a bit opposite to the way distortion is showing us, quieter signals are staying quiet for longer, and then only the extremely loud signals are peeking through. And playing with pregain might get us something a little metallic and chirpy and fun. That's interesting. Go ahead and collect that. Or we can go more in the regular distortion direction. So most signals on each side of zero are now being thought of as stronger and stronger and stronger. And if that's not enough, well, it's a modular environment. We could always double this up and say, well, then pass it through the same thing again. It's kind of fun, and you see that signal dancing a lot already. And again, not passing above 1, because these are just remapping the signal along the way in the pattern of what a shaper would do. All right. That was kind of fun. Back to our wave shapers. Wave folder is interesting. In a similar way, thinking about the higher and lower signals, it's now shifting that a little bit and saying, well, but let's wrap it back around to create something almost has a natural harmonicity, because you start repeating cycles at certain intervals. This could be fun to modulate that parameter. I like that version. It sounds a little extreme, but kind of fun. I'll go ahead and keep that. So now the maybe familiar quantizer. If we drop this in, it's saying how far apart each of our amplitude steps are, kind of redefining the curve of what's possible in this signal, and you start seeing the squares occurring. The bigger this is, the more frequently we will get silence, because our signal is not quite strong enough. It's kind of a fun, occasional parameter. I like that. So, we've now looked at a number of ways to take the audio going through and to kind of junk it up differently. They're all kind of fun, but what could be interesting, the reason we've collected all these, is to use them in combination somehow. So the way we typically think of dividing a signal and then applying effects to different portions of it would be to take a filter. So let's take a high-pass filter. Keep them at 1 pole. Keeps our math a little bit cleaner. So now we are only hearing the higher frequencies of the output. And if we wanted to be fun and keep everything tied to this cutoff for our crossover, we could do a little bit of math and say, I would like to subtract the original full bandwidth signal, take that signal and remove the high pass portion of it. So now if we only listen to this for a minute, we only have the bass parts. So again, just the low frequencies, just the high frequencies. And now we could take our different methods of distorting and apply it to different sections. So maybe I'll take something a little simpler for the low portion, like the distortion here, and apply it to the low frequencies. I can drag it over to the filter. I can hold down the control key to merge the signals with an add. We do have all those commands listed in the footer. And I'll remap this so we actually see the full output signal. So now the high portion isn't being tweaked at all. It's only the low portion that's having some distortion added. Now, we could do something to the high portion. Maybe move the wave folder up here. So we could do something a little bit more extreme on the high end. and something more subtle on the low end. That would be one way to do it. Or to only apply it to the low end is interesting too, and then recombine the signal in this fashion. But if we're talking about separating signals, something that becomes a little bit interesting with distortion, let's use a module we would not think of. Let's grab the min-max module. And an oscilloscope could be our friend to understand this one real quick. So what happens with min-max? Well, there are two signal inputs, and it is just comparing the two and saying, oh, the bigger current value will come out of this side, and the lower or smaller current value will come out of the minimum output. But fun thing about modular, if I connect nothing to the second input, I'm comparing to 0 implicitly. So now running this signal in, what I'm going to get is the positive of any signal is going to just come out of one output, and the negative side will come out of the other. So now we've got a nice, clean way of separating a signal into its positive and negative parts. This is how guitar cabinets actually work. The positive parts of the signal are affected less than the negative parts of the signal. But if we're just going to affect them differently and try to make something warm, that can be interesting too. So let's patch these in. We'll start hearing not much change to begin with. That's kind of the clean version of the signal. So maybe we want a distortion on the low portion. So if it's only happening on the negative portions now, let's make our chart a little more readable up there. Now again, we could still add something fun to the high portion of the signal if we wanted to. Maybe there's a little bit of clipping going on. But it's that difference of how the positive and negative parts are treated that gives us a characteristic sound. So finally, a little bit of a twist. We are here in Effects Grid, and as was pointed out earlier, this is an instrument track, which means notes are passing through, and if we look just in the device panel, we see the notes are still passing through the effects devices. That is the design of Bitwig Studio, not just the grid, but anything you're using. So does the grid, can it listen to notes coming in? Sure. And that's another fun way to manipulate things. The easiest way would be to take the low pass filter that's already here, turn him on, so we hear his effect, and then say be sensitive to pitches because there's a key track input. So now, as different pitches are coming in on the keyboard, different amounts of effect are being applied. Of course, it doesn't end here. We can bring that back off and just leave the filter on. We could take the pitch input from the I/O category and scroll to the very end and take the modulator out module, which will let us take any signal, including pitch, and then say, well, I would like this to manipulate different parameters in different amounts based on the pitch signal coming in. So a little bit more subtle, but something interesting going on, whether it's pitch, velocity, MPE parameters, any of it. So, thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon.